So I'm sure most of you have seen by now, or I guess I should say heard, since this was over a podcast on Zach Lowe's Low Post podcast, which he had Bobby Guest on as a guest on the show. They were discussing the upcoming trade deadline and some mock trades that should be considered, some of which they claim have actually been discussed by these teams and their front office as possibilities. But the one trade they proposed that I want to discuss on here and tie it to the broader topic at hand is a trade they suggested the Bulls make for Zach Lavine, a trade that would send Zach Lavine to the Lakers in exchange for Russell Westbrook and the Lakers' first-round picks in 2027 and 2029. 27 unprotected and 29 lightly protected. Yeah, and they feel the Bulls should seriously consider this. So in this video, we're going to be talking about how terrible of a trade that would be and why the Bulls would never consider that as a viable option, but also still discussing what is Zach's actual trade value in this market and would it even make sense for the Bulls to move him at this point. Also, a big shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video, but more on that in a little bit. So what's going on, everyone? You were listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I don't think it should come as a surprise to anyone that some of these national media pundits and figureheads, usually affiliated with ESPN, will come up with these ridiculous trade proposals and act like they're totally reasonable and make sense for both sides involved in the trade. Like, even for myself as a biased Bulls fan, even when I'm thinking about trades the Bulls should consider or putting together mock packages, I try my best to also see it from the other team or team's perspective where it would actually make sense for them as well. Because yes, there would be a lot of amazing trades the Bulls could pursue, but is the other team even going to agree to it? Well, in this instance, this is beyond horribly a bad trade for the Bulls. While the Lakers, they would jump on this in a heartbeat, considering the state of their roster and needing another star level player on their team and an elite level scorer. First of all, the trade can't actually work as currently proposed by Zach and Bobby because Westbrook and his salary doesn't match that of Zach Lavine, so the Bulls would have to add in another $10 million or so in salary filler to make the trade work, which at that point, the trade becomes even less favorable given you're likely going to have to include someone like Coby White, or unless the Bulls are able to add Tony Bradley, Marko Simonovic, and maybe Derrick Jones Jr. as added salary. But again, you're giving up a lot of assets to take on Westbrook's expiring contract and 2 first-round picks that are so far out into the future. Now, here's the thing. I don't think anyone would deny that Zach's trade value is at an all-time low. Well, I shouldn't say all-time low, but it's pretty low considering he hasn't performed that well this season. His on-court, off-court numbers aren't the best. He's not the best decision maker in late-game situations. That's kind of always been the case. You also have to factor in the injury concerns as well and the history there. And then, most importantly, his max contract. Dude just got a 5-year, $215 million contract that is fully guaranteed. So you're talking about taking on a big contract that could be harder to move down the line depending on how Zach performs over the next couple of seasons. If Zach was on a team-friendly deal, like the contract he was on before, this would be a different question entirely. But the contract is a big reason why this trade value is lower than some might think. But if Zach's trade value is that low, to the point where the Bulls would effectively be treating this as a salary dump, getting the contract off the books since Westbrook's contract is expiring and they wouldn't re-sign him anyway, a salary dump and taking on 2 first-round picks 4 and 6 years from now. Picks you have no idea whether they'll be high lottery picks or even late first rounders. Like, I see a lot of people saying, well, the Lakers will probably be bad 4 to 6 years from now after LeBron retires and Anthony Davis is old and likely out of the picture. And while sure, that could be the case, you don't know what can happen in the next 4 to 6 years. You don't know what the landscape of the league is going to look like by then. The Lakers very well could be a decent team. And so it's possible you could be trading away and clearing up cap space for picks that could very well be mid to late first rounders and not amount to much of anything as players. And even if they do end up being high lottery picks, there is also no guarantee that those picks turn into much of anything. Like, I don't think people realize because of how far out these picks are, it makes them much less valuable than a lot of the media is trying to portray them to be. Like, it's all you ever hear about right now when it comes to the Lakers and their trade assets, these 2 first-round picks in 2027 and 2029, as if they're absolutely hot commodities. I'm not saying that they're worthless assets. They're still first-round picks, but the timing of these picks for any team doesn't make them as appealing. And then the other piece is, say what you will about Zach Lavine. I know he's fallen out of favor with a lot of Bulls fans. I myself have been hard on Zach and disappointed in his play and was never on board with the organization giving him a max contract. But the fact remains, the front office, they did give him that max contract. And everything they have done since taking the helm from Gar Pax has been about building around Zach Lavine. They traded picks, Wendell Carter Jr. for Vucevic. They did a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan, they brought in Lonzo Ball, they moved on from Lauri Markkanen. All of this was to ensure they retained Zach, and they gave him the best offer to keep him on the squad. They're not going to trade him. Not saying they won't ever trade him at some point in his 5-year deal, but they're not going to trade him this early after having just signed him and preaching continuity for the ball club since the beginning of the season. Unless, it's some insane haul that they just can't refuse, kind of like when the Wolves offered the Jazz 5 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert. Like, every player has a trade price that can't be ignored no matter how committed they are to the organization. But Westbrook and 2 first-round picks that far into the future is not it. That's not even close to being enticing enough to want to move on from Zach Lavine. If Zach's trade value is that low, you might as well just hold on to him because you know he can be better. You know that there will be better offers for someone like Zach Lavine, a high-level scorer who is great off the catch and shoot and creating his own shot and slashing to the basket. Zach Lavine has his flaws. We know that. I feel like we talk about that ad nauseum. But he's a good enough player to be worth more than this ridiculous trade proposal Zach Lowe and Bobby Marks are saying the Bulls should consider. But all of this did get me thinking, what is exactly Zach's trade value right now, and would it make sense for the Bulls to consider trading him based on his market value? But before I get into that, you guys know the Bulls have a game tomorrow against the Magic, and if you like making predictions on how certain players will show up, like Zach Lavine, then you're going to want to hear from today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Guys, the offer aside, Underdog Fantasy is truly the easiest fantasy sports app to use and navigate with their user-friendly interface. My personal favorite that I use to play on the app is NBA Pick'ems. Underdog Fantasy has higher or lowers on most player stats. Just pick higher on whether you think Zach is going to score more than 22 points tomorrow night against the Magic, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 pick'ems and get them all right. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the code BULLCENTRAL, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money? You also can follow along with my picks once you sign up, and we can even have some friendly competition. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys make. But anyway, let's get back into the topic at hand. So when assessing Zach Lavine's trade value, it's important to note a few factors. One, his contract, which we know is a max deal, and we still have 4 years left on that deal after the season. His age, 27, so he's in the peak of his prime and could theoretically get better, and it's unlikely he'll be declining anytime soon, or at least anytime during this portion of his current contract. And obviously his overall production, but it's also not terrible either. Zach is currently averaging near 24 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, and 4.2 assists on decent efficiency, shooting 46% and 37% from 3 on near 8 attempts per game with an overall PER of 17.8. Like, those are good numbers. Granted, his overall IQ is questionable at times, his defense is suspect, and of course you have to factor in that he's had a history with injuries. Not anything serious. I wouldn't say that Zach is injury prone by any means, but he's not as durable as you would maybe like for someone who is on a max contract. The other piece in this, the external market factors to consider. What have other players been going for who were of a similar caliber? Keep in mind, DeJounte Murray was traded for 3 first-round picks, 2 of which were unprotected. Rudy Gobert, 5 first-round picks, 3 of which were unprotected. Donovan Mitchell, 3 first-round picks, and young players like Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, and Jared Vanderbilt. I'm not saying that Zach is on the same level of those guys, but he's not that far off either, where you look at his overall level of production, the fact that he's in his prime and is a 2-time All-Star. Like, the trade market has completely changed for trading All-Star level talent or even fringe All-Star level talent. Now, I do think that this is going to change. I think teams like the Hawks and Wolves are now realizing what a mistake it was to give up that many assets for lower level all-stars, and because of that, the rest of the league has also taken note of it, and maybe trading multiple first round picks for all-stars is a bit much. I actually made a video on that on my NBA channel, citing how teams are never going to do this again in letting these types of deals get done and mortgaging their future. But be all of that as it may, despite that Zach's trade value is low as it currently stands today, despite the fact that teams aren't going to be eager to shell out 4 picks or something crazy to get a player like Zach Lavine, I do still think that a player of Lavine's caliber, knowing what he is in fact capable of doing when he's healthy, knowing that his contract isn't bad by any means relative to others around the league, I still think that Zach Lavine at a minimum is worth 2 first-round picks, not picks that are a half a decade out into the future, 2 near first-round picks, unprotected, and a good up-and-coming young player still on a rookie deal, or a team-friendly contract role player that provides a lot of value when on the court, not Russell Westbrook. I would even say that Zach Lavine's value could be 3 first-round picks if it doesn't include a young, talented player, considering what the Spurs got for DeJounte Murray. And yes, I also realize that you have to have some sort of salary filler player to make a trade like Lavine work given his current annual salary, and that would impact what a package could look like if the Bulls are taking on a bad contract in return for all the picks, or it's an expiring deal they can just get off their books after the season. Like what's been suggested in the Westbrook deal is good because it's an expiring contract, but all that being said, does it even make sense for the Bulls to trade Lavine? Given where the Bulls are at, 10th in the Western Conference, not really anywhere close to being able to compete for a title, not having a lot of assets to work with for the future, does trading Lavine make sense for the Bulls here? I mean, if they can actually get what his market value should dictate anyway, as I've outlined, it probably would make sense to trade him, given I really don't see a future where Lavine is a number 1 option leading the Bulls to a title run. And yes, if you're going to trade Lavine, you might as well blow it up and trade DeRozan and Vucevic as well. But at the same time, do I think the front office is going to do that? No, they're not going to trade Zach Lavine because it would mean blowing up the roster, and they're not going to do that after having made all these changes just a couple years ago. So I guess it's kind of a moot point to even talk about because the front office does strike me as being a bit stubborn and unwilling to accept that the roster they put together doesn't work. But it's still fun to talk about nonetheless. What do you guys think Zach Lavine's trade value is though? Do you think the Bulls should look to move him? Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.